I spent my life trying to impress people who never cared. That is a painful sentence to say out loud, especially when you realize how many years are inside it. I do not mean I lived my whole life in some obvious performance, always dressed up, always chasing status, always begging to be seen. It was quieter than that. It was more normal than that, more socially acceptable. I spent years choosing based on imagined judgment, based on what people might think, based on what would make me look successful enough, respectable enough, attractive enough, smart enough, put together enough. I adjusted myself in rooms where nobody was truly studying me that closely. I carried stress from opinions that mostly existed in my head. I edited my life around people who, in truth, were too busy with their own insecurities to care about mine as much as I feared they did. That realization came to me late, much later than I wish. And the reason it hurts is not only because it was false. It is because it shaped so much. It shaped how I dressed, how I spoke, what I admitted, what I hid, what I pursued, what I postponed, what risks I took, what risks I never took, and who I became in the process. When you spend enough years living for approval, you stop asking what is true for you. You start asking what will be admired, what will be accepted, what will be safe, what will keep you from feeling exposed. That is not freedom. It is a polished kind of captivity. I do not think I understood how early this starts for most people. You learn quickly what gets approval and what gets embarrassment, what makes adults smile and what makes them stiffen, what makes peers include you and what makes them quietly move away. If you are sensitive, you pick it up fast. You learn to monitor yourself. You learn which version of yourself moves through the world with the least friction. You learn how to soften what is inconvenient, hide what is vulnerable, exaggerate what is admired, and suppress what might invite rejection. It feels like maturity when you are young. It feels like social intelligence. Sometimes it even is. But there is a line between being socially aware and becoming emotionally dependent on approval. I crossed that line before I knew it was there. I became very skilled at reading rooms, at sensing shifts in tone, at catching tiny expressions, at adjusting, at staying acceptable. I learned how to speak in ways that would not make people uncomfortable. I learned how to seem fine when I was not. I learned how to look composed, agreeable, steady. I learned how to build a version of myself that moved through the world with enough approval to feel safe. What I did not learn was how to stay rooted in myself while doing it. I did not know that every time I abandoned a truth because I feared how it would be received, I was teaching myself that belonging mattered more than honesty. The tragedy is that this kind of life can look completely normal from the outside. You can have a job, a family, a decent reputation, good manners, a presentable life. You can be admired, even liked, and still feel strangely hollow. Because approval is not the same as intimacy. Approval is not the same as peace. Approval is not the same as self-respect. And if you spend too many years chasing it, you start to feel the distance between the life you are performing and the life you are actually living. That distance grows quietly. At first, it just feels like tension. You care too much about what people think of your decisions. You replay conversations. You notice what others are doing and measure yourself against it. You imagine criticism before anyone has spoken. You feel embarrassed by things no one else is even thinking about. You hesitate to start things because you fear looking foolish. You buy things to look more stable than you feel. You stay in situations too long because leaving might look like failure. You say yes because no might disappoint people. You become extremely responsive to perception, and over time, perception begins ruling more of your life than principle. That was me. I wanted to be seen as responsible, capable, successful, emotionally in control, worth admiring. I did not always want luxury or attention in a flashy way. Sometimes I just wanted the quiet relief of not feeling judged. But when avoiding judgment becomes one of the main engines of your life, it takes too much from you. It makes you self-conscious in moments that should be free. It makes you hold back in relationships that require honesty. It makes you choose appearances over alignment. It makes your nervous system live in public even when you are alone. I think one of the saddest parts is how much energy it takes. Trying to impress people is exhausting, especially when you do not even admit that is what you are doing. You call it being responsible, being polished, staying on top of things, being presentable, being appropriate. But underneath all of that, there is often anxiety. Anxiety about how you are being seen, anxiety about whether you are enough, anxiety about whether your life looks acceptable, anxiety about falling behind, anxiety about being misunderstood, rejected, dismissed, underestimated. It becomes a background hum. And if you live with that hum long enough, you stop recognizing how unnatural it is. There were so many decisions I made from that place. I wore things because they made me feel more legitimate. I hid struggles because I did not want to look weak. I pursued goals because they sounded respectable, not because they felt deeply true. I delayed other goals because they might make me look naive, unrealistic, or less put together. I said yes in rooms where I wanted to say no. I smiled when I wanted to tell the truth. I maintained versions of myself long after I felt them becoming too small. And the strangest thing is this: the people I was trying to impress were usually not paying nearly as much attention as I imagined. Most of them were wrapped up in their own fears, their own comparisons, their own insecurities, their own private worlds. That is one of the hardest truths to accept. You can waste years trying to manage the judgment of people who are not even studying you that carefully. People think about us far less than we imagine, and yet imagined judgment can control a life. It can decide what business you do not start, what truth you do not say, what clothing you wear, what house you stretch to afford, what marriage you stay silent inside, what dream you quietly abandon, what version of yourself you never fully become. Not because someone directly stopped you, because the fear of how it might look became stronger than the desire to live honestly. I remember how much of my peace depended on signals from the outside. A compliment could lift me too much. A cold look could affect me too much. Someone else's success could make me feel smaller than it should have. Someone else's opinion could echo inside me for days. That is what happens when your identity gets too entangled with approval. You become emotionally outsourced. Other people's reactions begin governing your internal weather, and that is no way to live. It makes you fragile in places that should be anchored. I also think trying to impress people changes the way you love. You stop showing yourself fully. You start managing your image even in close relationships. You become careful in ways that keep you from being known. You might look good together, sound good together, function well together, but there is still performance in the room. Performance destroys intimacy because intimacy requires the courage to stop curating, to stop presenting, to stop polishing yourself in real time, to let someone meet the messy, unflattering, uncertain, unguarded truth. I was not good at that for a long time. I knew how to be pleasant. I knew how to be admired. I did not always know how to be real. And the cost of that is not only loneliness, it is confusion. Because when you spend enough time editing yourself, eventually you begin losing track of what is you and what is adaptation. What do you actually want? What do you actually value? What are you doing because it is yours? And what are you doing because it looks like the kind of life worthy people are supposed to want? That question haunted me later in life. I realized I had spent too many years building a presentable life without asking deeply enough whether it was a truthful one. There is something especially cruel about approval as a life strategy. It never settles you. Even when you get it, the relief does not last. Someone praises you, and for a moment, you feel safe. Then the mind asks whether you can maintain it. whether you can stay worthy of that image, whether people will still think well of you if they see more. Approval feeds insecurity as often as it soothes it, because once your nervous system gets used to being regulated from the outside, it keeps going back for more. It never becomes enough. That is why so many people look polished and still feel restless, admired and still feel uncertain, successful and still feel exposed. I reached a point in my life where the effort of maintaining appearances began feeling heavier than the comfort they brought. I was tired of caring so much, tired of comparing, tired of anticipating judgment, tired of dressing pain in acceptability, tired of making decisions with invisible audiences in mind, tired of giving so much authority to people who were not living my life and, in many cases, were not even thinking about me nearly as much as I feared. That tiredness was a gift, though it did not feel like one at first. Sometimes exhaustion is what finally makes honesty possible. I remember a moment when it hit me clearly. I was worried about how something would look if I changed direction in my life. Not a scandal, not a collapse, just a shift. But I could feel how much of my hesitation was built around imagined reactions. What will people think? Will they assume I failed? Will they think I am unstable? Will they judge me for changing at this stage? And suddenly, I had a thought so clean, it almost embarrassed me. These people are not carrying my life. They are not waking up with my regret. They are not lying in bed with my unrest. They are not responsible for my future. Why do they have so much power in my head? That question started unraveling years of false loyalty. Why had I spent so much energy trying to be legible to people who did not truly know me? Why had I chased approval from people who were not capable of giving me peace? Why had I let imagined judgment make me smaller than I needed to be? Why had I treated visibility like safety? It became impossible to ignore the answer. Because I had not learned how to belong to myself. I had learned how to manage perception, but not how to stand cleanly inside my own values regardless of who approved. And that is what I wish someone had explained earlier. If you do not build your identity from the inside, the world will gladly offer you substitutes. Image, praise, comparison, status, approval, social proof. They will all feel like stability for a while, but none of them can do what self-respect does. None of them can make you peaceful in private. None of them can quiet the deep discomfort of knowing you are not living your own life, honestly. I think about the things I postponed because they did not look impressive enough. The simpler life I might have chosen sooner. The truths I could have spoken earlier. The freedom I could have felt if I had stopped overvaluing other people's imagined opinions. I think about how many ordinary, beautiful moments I polluted with self-consciousness. Moments that should have been light, direct, alive. Instead, I was partly occupied by how I appeared. That is such a sad way to move through a life. If I could speak to my younger self, I would tell her this. Most people are not thinking about you nearly as much as you think, and the few who judge you harshly are rarely qualified to guide your life. I would tell her that respectability is a poor substitute for freedom. I would tell her that you can spend years building a life others approve of and still feel like a stranger inside it. I would tell her that some of the most expensive decisions are made not from desire, not from wisdom, but from the fear of looking wrong in someone else's eyes. I would also tell her that there is a difference between being thoughtful and being performative, between being considerate and being approval-driven, between dressing well and hiding, between being kind and erasing yourself, between being successful and curating a life for witnesses. She needed that distinction. I needed that distinction. Because without it, almost any fear-based behavior can be dressed up as maturity. The truth is, impressing people is a hollow goal because people move on, they forget, they update their opinions, they project their own insecurities, they misunderstand you anyway, they praise one thing today and admire something opposite tomorrow. Public opinion, even in small social circles, is unstable. If you build yourself around it, you become unstable too. I did not know that deeply enough when I was younger. I thought if I could just get things right enough, look right enough, seem put together enough, the pressure inside me would finally settle. It never did. Because the pressure was not coming from the world. It was coming from a self that had learned to fear disapproval more than dishonesty. And that is where I believe the real healing begins. Not when everyone finally understands you, not when all judgment disappears, not when you perfectly stop caring what anyone thinks. Healing begins when truth becomes more valuable to you than image, when peace becomes more valuable than impression, when your private alignment starts mattering more than public interpretation, when you realize that a quiet, honest life is worth more than a polished, anxious one. I spent my life trying to impress people who never cared in the way I imagined. And the years I spent doing that are years I cannot get back. But I can say this now with complete clarity. The prison was never other people. It was the authority I gave their imagined judgment over my choices. Once I saw that, something loosened. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to stop performing so hard. Enough to tell the truth more quickly. Enough to choose differently. Enough to disappoint some people and survive it. Enough to understand that being lightly misunderstood is far better than being deeply untrue. So, if you are listening to me now and you feel your life bending around other people's eyes, stop and ask yourself a painful but necessary question. Who are you still trying to impress, and what is it costing you? Is it costing you honesty, rest, simplicity, courage, direction, financial peace, emotional peace, the chance to become someone truer? Because if it is, then the price is too high. No admiration is worth a life lived in costume. Most people are not watching you that closely. And the ones who are will not save you from the consequences of betraying yourself. Only you will live with those. Only you will carry the regret. Only you will know what it felt like to spend years polishing a life that never fully fit. Do not do that for 20 more years. Let people misunderstand you if they must. Let some people think you changed too much, slowed down too much, simplified too much, started too late, looked foolish, looked uncertain, looked different than they expected. None of that matters as much as this. Are you finally living a life you can respect when no one is watching? That is the only audience that lasts.